Okay, welcome to our webinar today. Today we're going to be discussing OpenAir Scripting. And OpenAir Scripting is available to allow data validation and manipulation behind the scenes, not using the standard OpenAir user interface. It can enhance notification and approval processes. If you find that the notifications and alerts that OpenAir has out of the box are not quite meeting your needs, scripts can easily add to the functionality of those features. The scripting engine uses standard JavaScript. It has a few OpenAir specific libraries that execute commands specific to OpenAir's read and write functionality, logging functionalities, etc. We'll go over what those functions are and what they do here in just a little bit. Unlike a lot of web-based scripting, this cannot be used to change the OpenAir user interface. Often people think of JavaScript as something that they can use to add fields to a form or change formats of different web pages or change colors or what have you. OpenAir's JavaScript implementation is not designed to do that, does not allow that. It is designed strictly to manipulate the data coming in and out of OpenAir. There's two types of scripts that you can execute in OpenAir. The first is what they call a form script, which is triggered by saving or submitting or approving a form. A form being, as you would expect, any item in OpenAir that you fill out a form to complete. For example, a project properties form, a user demographic form, etc. It's primarily useful for form validation. If you need to check that a certain field meets a certain requirement, this is a great way to do it. It's very simple to implement. Form scripts are rarely very long. They tend to be maybe 20 lines of code or so, and they take very little time to implement. They're also pretty limited, and we'll talk about those limitations here in just a minute. But if you have just a simple validation or a simple manipulation, this is a good way to go. Scheduled scripts trigger on a set schedule, as often as once every 5 minutes. And they are useful primarily for data manipulation and adjustments. These are the kinds of things that if you need to have all of the dates changed on your charges for some reason, you could use this to calculate what date you wanted and stamp that date on all of your charges every month or something like that. Very useful for that type of data alteration, data manipulation. These have much higher thresholds than form scripts do. They can accomplish a lot more than form scripts can. And again, we'll talk about that here coming up, and what that means. All of these scripts, form scripts or scheduled scripts, have what they call governance limitations. And if you're familiar with any cloud application, you'll see these same limitations exist virtually on every cloud software that there is. They're different from software to software. They're set by the designers, developers of the software, but they all have these limitations. In OpenAir's, there is a limit. There are two governance limitations. There's one on the number of transactions. Well, actually, there's three. There's one on the number of transactions, the one on the time the script has to run, and if you are using the script's send mail function, there's one on the number of emails that you can send. So if we look at the number of transactions, each command takes a certain number of units, and you'll find this information in OpenAir Scripting Guide, which we'll get you a link to it near the end of the presentation. It's not as straightforward as just you're getting this many records, you're calling OpenAir this many times. It actually is more of a point system. So for example, if you read a value from a form in a form script, that costs 1 unit. If you're writing an error message to your log file, that costs 4 units. If you're reading values from the database, typically with a scheduled script, you have 20 units that it takes to execute the read, and then 10 units for each record that is read. Okay, and then you hit a certain limit of units that you can use in a form or a scheduled script. If you try to calculate these, it gets to be pretty hairy. But OpenAir provides a way that you can see how many units you've used, and we'll talk about that here. Note that these governance limitations are totally separate from OpenAir's API governance limits. So if you are using OpenAir's API through an integration tool, for example, Bell Boomi or something of that nature, those limitations are based strictly on number of service calls. You have 10,000 service calls, that's that. It doesn't use this units system. If you use a certain amount of your API limitation and you use a certain amount of your script limitation, those are not additive. You can max both of them out independently. So be aware that those are very separate. As of the last release, here are the limitations that each of these governance setups have. Form scripts have 5 seconds to run. That's it. Because you're working on a form, you're working in a web page, you don't want the user to have to sit there and sit there and sit there. And so they limit those to 5 seconds. You have 1,000 quote unquote units, that count system that we just talked about, to use in a form script. That's not going to do a whole lot for you. There's a few things you can do with that, but if you try to read a few records or a set of records in a form script, you get a decent chance of hitting that units limit. And a form script can send 3 emails. Now note that that's not an email to 3 different people. You can send an email to 100 different people, and that counts as 1. So you can only send 3 emails from a form script in one run. Scheduled script is much more robust, as you can see. It has an hour runtime. It allows you to use 1 million units, and it can send 100 different emails in one run. So if you're doing anything beyond very simple validation or very simple data manipulation, you're going to want to use a scheduled script for that. All right, scripting within OpenAir. So what you're seeing here is the new user interface. This scripting center was introduced about 5 years ago. It's been enhanced in every release since. They are committed to making this better and better with every release, which is encouraging. The scripting center acts as a container within OpenAir to ensure that the scripts that you write or somebody in your organization writes cannot mess up your data with certain limitations. So in other words, you can't tell it to change, you can't tell it to change data from a system that will make it so a project is connected to a customer A over here, but that same project is connected to customer B over here, and you end up with all sorts of data integrity errors. It will not allow that. This is why they've built this within the tool, so they can keep some level of control over it to keep people from being able to damage their data integrity. That scripting center also provides some nice functions to assist with quicker script building. You still need to know JavaScript. If you don't have a basic understanding of JavaScript, you're going to have to get one, at least to a certain knowledge, because this is not going to write this. These functions are not going to write the script for you. You still have to be able to understand the language. You can find it by clicking on the administration module on the left, and there's a scripting center on the bottom of that list. You can see in the red box. Once you find it, you see the interface that you see at the bottom of the screen now. The administration and the form, scheduled, library, parameters, and solutions. We'll talk a little bit about library and parameters and solutions here as we go. This is how OpenAir intends the development cycle to function within that scripting center. It's a built-in, though manually executed workflow, allows development and testing to occur in an OpenAir environment without affecting data altered by anybody but that user. So you can have a script in your production environment that doesn't impact anybody except for the user that you've identified as the tester. So for example, if you built a form script and identified yourself as the tester, say you built a form script on a project. When you go into a project and save something, that form script gets triggered and does whatever you've told it to do. When your colleague goes into that project or any project form and saves it, that script has no effect. It doesn't do anything because they were not identified as the tester. Once you are comfortable that this works, you've tested it thoroughly, you can then deploy it, which makes it available to all users. Once that script is deployed, you can still edit it and have those changes only impact your tester. And so now you can have a script that's in production, everybody's getting the benefits of it, and you want to make a change to it, you can change that exact same script without having to undeploy it. So your users still are unaffected, and then you can test it yourself. Basic overview of what the Scripting Center looks like. On the left, you see the little functions that it has available to you to help you build scripts. On the right is the actual code. And this is just a very basic text editor that you can type in JavaScript code. You can copy and paste into this if you're using a different application to create your code. It's just your very straightforward text editor. We'll talk about these functions here on the left. What they do are as follows. The Scripting Studio is what identifies who your test owner is, what function starts this script, so you can have multiple functions within your script. And this one tells it which one to use to start, what libraries you're going to call, etc. Script owner, just to be aware, the script owner has to have data view and permissions to act on script impacted data. In other words, if your script owner doesn't have the right filter set to see the data that they're trying to manipulate, they still won't see it. The script adheres to the filter sets that have been set up in OpenAir. The SOAP Explorer shows you all of the tables and fields available for script use. This is really handy. When you use the SOAP Explorer, you'll see a list of, it's a drop-down that shows you every table that you can access via script. And when you click that table, then the next drop-down underneath is a dependent choice list that will show you all of the fields available for that table. Why this is so helpful is that it gives you the exact spellings and punctuations that you need to use if you're going to call that table and field. So for example, and this is a little bit of an inconsistency in OpenAir, most of the time, if a table is referencing a project, it'll use the variable, the field name, project ID, all one word, no underscores. So for example, if you're looking at the project task table, all of the records in that table will have a project ID that those tasks are associated with, and it will be project ID, one word, no underscores. There are at least 2 or 3 tables that reference a project ID that have that same field name spelled differently, where they have put project underscore ID. Using this SOAP Explorer is going to help you identify what the exact spelling of that field is for that exact table. We're getting close to 1,000 scripts, I think now. We've written hundreds and hundreds of scripts, and all of our developers still use this religiously. The Functions Explorer will show you all of the OpenAir specific JavaScript functions. So this goes back to that OpenAir specific library I mentioned earlier. Using that Functions Explorer, you will be able to see all of the different OpenAir specific functions and their exact syntax as well, along with an example of how to use them. This can be also very, very handy if you're not quite sure how a certain function should be punctuated or formatted. This will show you. Script parameters allows parameters to be sent to a script. What this means is that there's a section in OpenAir called the parameters section within the Scripting Center that allows you to specify values that you want passed to the script. And if you need to change those values, you can change them in the parameters section without having to make any code changes. Where this is particularly useful is with email addresses. If you have a script that sends a notification to person X when something happens, and all of a sudden person X is not the right person anymore and it should go to person Y, if you use a script parameter to tell OpenAir what that email address is to send to, then all you have to do is quickly change the parameter to the new person or the new email address. There's no code change required, and it just works. We've also used this for different variables such as a booking type or a task type. If you want a script to function only on bookings that have a certain type, and then you change which type that is, Again, no coding required. You just simply set a new parameter. It's very simple. The custom field section will show you all of the custom fields and their associated tables. I haven't found a great deal of use for this, to be honest. Those custom fields are displayed in the SOAP Explorer that we talked about for each table, and they're displayed with their correct spelling. So I haven't really needed to use this particular piece of the functionality before. It's there as a reference, but I haven't found it to be terribly necessary. There's a terminology section that shows you what this instance's specific terminology is. So for example, if you've changed the word project in your OpenAir instance to something else, this will show you what projects are named in this particular instance. So you can reference that. Again, not terribly useful. Most folks know what this terminology is for their instance already, but it's there as a reference. And then for form scripts, there's a form schema. And this is very similar to the SOAP Explorer. At the same time, this is another area with some confusing inconsistencies. And again, I'll give you an example here. Let's say that you're working on a form for a project. And when you look at the SOAP Explorer, if you look at the project table, you'll see that the project owner field is called user ID. One word, no underscores. If you look at the form itself, the project owner field is not called user ID, it's called project owner. So it's the same field, but the form references it as a project owner. The database stores it as user ID. So this can get pretty confusing. If you're using a form script and you're referencing the fields on the form directly, the SOAP Explorer will not help you. You want to use the form schema instead. If you are referencing data that is stored in the database already, so after the form has been saved, that SOAP Explorer is where you want to go. Hopefully that's clear. That can be pretty confusing. All right, the specific libraries provided by OpenAir. These all start with NSOA, which, as you probably have guessed, means NetSuite OpenAir. The context library provides just system information. This is where that unit usage comes in. There's a function within NSOA.context that allows you to see the remaining units that your script has to use. So you can always check in your script, you can reference this and write it to the log file to see, okay, up to this point in the script, I've used this many units. Up to this point, I've used that many. So you can always see how many units you have left through this library. It does the same thing with time. It'll tell you how long the script has run. So you can get kind of a benchmark on if you're going to have performance issues or governance issues with these scripts. The form library is exactly what you would expect. It gives you all of the commands that you need to read and write to a specific form in a form script. The meta library is primarily used for logging and alerts. If you want to write something to OpenAir's script log, you would use nsoa.meta to do that. There is an NS connector library that is very, very specific. It is only used to allow a script to execute your NetSuite integration. If you have a built-in NetSuite integration and you want to kick it off after a certain event happens, let's say you need to manipulate some data before your NetSuite integration runs. You can use the script to manipulate the data, and when it's done, it will kick off that NetSuite integration for you. That can be pretty handy as well. The only downside to this that I know of is that it does not tell you when it's done. So if you are trying to do some data manipulation after your NetSuite integration has run, you can kick it off from the script, but the script has no way of knowing when it's done. So well, I shouldn't say no way, no straightforward way. Let's put it that way. NSOA.record. This is what you use when you want to create a record of a specific type, a user record, a project record. And by create, I'm not talking about necessarily creating one in the database, but you're creating one in the code that you can use then to read database records or write them or do whatever. You're given an object in the JavaScript code that matches the structure of that record from OpenAir. The report library is used to access metadata associated with reports, not the reports themselves. It's used for the OpenAir Business Intelligence connector, which you may know that as the OData connector. If you're not using that, this really doesn't have any impact on you. If you would like a way of exporting your report data to any other tool, a BI tool, an Excel, any tool that is cognizant of the OData protocol, this could be a really useful tool for you. That's something that we would cover in a different webinar, but something you could look into. The WS API stands for Web Service API. That's what you use to manipulate the data that's in OpenAir's database. The functions under this library are read, write, add. I shouldn't say write, that's not there. Read, modify, add, delete. All your basic database commands are in that library. And then the HTTPS library. This is brand new from the last release, and we're going to talk about this in some detail because this is, for those of us who enjoy this kind of thing, this has turned into be pretty exciting, but we'll get to that in a couple slides. What you see here is just a quick example of a form script. This is a form script on a time entry, and what this does is identifies if somebody has put in a negative value into that form, into that time entry box, and if they have, it throws an error. This was requested by a specific client a few years back. They did not want people putting in negative hours on any of their time entry boxes. And so we built this for them. As you can see, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code approximately, depending on how you count it. It took just a few minutes to write and test. So that's the kind of thing you can do with form scripts. It's very simple, very straightforward. Now this is the simplest example I know of. Most of what we've done has been a little more complex than this, but not terribly, to be honest. So this, yeah, as that says, all this does is identify when a negative value has been found and it throws an error. Now here's some examples of scheduled scripts. I didn't include the code because these are much longer. But you can sum the total of planned, these are things that we have done for clients. Most of these are things we've done for multiple clients. Summing the total of planned or booked hours on all tasks for a project and moving that total to the budget hours field on the project. Some folks calculate their budget based on what the total of their planned or the total of their booked hours is. And this will populate that budget hours field right on the project properties with that value. Another one we've done is splitting fixed fee revenue transactions so that they're associated with the users that worked toward that revenue, distributing them proportionally. A variation on this is we've also done this where it distributes them proportionally by their hours and their user cost. So that's been useful for folks trying to determine utilization based on revenue. Copying a field on a project properties to every charge associated with that project. If you want all the charges to say, you know, such and such value from your project so that it transfers to your financial application, for example, with that particular value, you can use this for that purpose. Updating custom project property fields with dates from specific tasks and milestones on the project. So you could run a summary report or a detail report, I guess I should say, from a project that shows here's when the prototype was complete, here's when UAT was complete, here's the expected go-live date. And these are based on when someone completed the milestone task, and then the script populates that date field on the project. And so you have that information right there on the project without having to look at any of the milestone tasks to identify which ones have been done and when they were done. Makes the reporting quite a bit simpler for that. Those are just some examples. Again, we've written, I believe we're well over 700 or 800 scripts at this point. And I'd say the majority of them have been scheduled scripts, probably 80 to 90%, because these can do so much more than the form scripts can do. There's some good examples out on our website. Chances are, if you can dream it up, it can probably be scripted. A few items on best practices. There's 3 websites that I would direct you to. The first one is OpenAir Scripting Guide. OpenAir's done a fantastic job with this. I find this to be really high quality documentation on how to use OpenAir scripts down to a very detailed level. They have examples. They have some code that you can actually use in implementing your OpenAir system. This is a very good tool. The second one is OpenAir's Data Dictionary. This is also pretty useful, but it can be pretty overwhelming. There are hundreds of tables that make up OpenAir's behind-the-scenes application. This shows you all of them and all of the fields associated with each one. That's one where I would just be a little bit careful because it can be a little bit intimidating when you first open it. And then if you need a good JavaScript reference site, there's one listed here. There's many of them out on the internet, but this is, I guess, probably my favorite. It seems to be the most easily understood. And again, that SOAP Explorer, the Functions Explorer, and the Scripting Center that we talked about. Really recommend that you have these available for you if you're going to use the scripting engine. Be aware of these, have them readily available. Use script logging. You can log the number of records read when a read function occurs. That is a very good validation to ensure that you got all of the records you expected to get. You can evaluate whenever you do an add or a modify to the database. You can log if that was successful or not. There's error codes that come back that'll tell you what that did, and you can write those to the log. You can log the remaining units, the remaining time that we talked about, so you know how much of your governance limitations you're using. Put in useful logs in the script. Use that a lot. Take advantage of the logging levels. This is a complicated system as well, something I'd recommend you read up on the scripting guide, but I can give you an overview here. There's 6 levels of script logging. Fatal, if you set a script to only show you fatal logs, then you will only get errors in the log file that show you when something has completely bombed. And that's all you will see. If you show any one of the lower levels, you'll see items that were coded with that log level. So for example, one of the things we do a lot of is, like I said, that count of read records. We'll usually put that count as an info level log. And so if people are interested in seeing that every time the script runs, they can tell the script run at the info log level and it will display. If they run it at a higher level, warning, error, or fatal, it won't display, and they don't clutter their log with a count if they're not interested in it. So that's kind of how that works. It's a hierarchical system. If you set it to warning, then everything from warning and above will show. If you set it to trace, everything shows. All right. OpenAir Scripting can introduce logic specific to your business process needs. It can increase your data accuracy, can communicate via email when events occur, and it can provide integration capability between OpenAir and other systems. Now, this is what we want to talk about a little bit more in detail. If you've seen this scripting presentation before, then most of what we've shared so far is not new to you. This, however, is. As of the April 2019 release, and then further enhanced in the October 2019 release, OpenAir has provided a method for you to interact with other systems directly from an OpenAir script. The upshot of this is that you can now write integrations between OpenAir and other applications without any third-party middleware at all. It has proven to be quite robust. It has proven to be very useful and actually simpler than you might think. As an example, we were able to push a Salesforce integration out with just basic account and opportunity transfer functionality in just a couple hours. It was really that simple. Full reading and updating of accounts and opportunities in Salesforce with customers and projects in OpenAir in literally just a couple of hours. Some of the tools that we've written to, unfortunately I had a slide for this and it doesn't look like it made it into the presentation. So I'll make sure that it's in there before we publish this on our website so you can see this information. But it can integrate, we have done integrations with Salesforce. We've done integrations with Jira, Concur. We've integrated with a system called Ignite that's used for document repositories. We can integrate with NetSuite if there's things that the out-of-the-box integration doesn't do. Then you can script those things to happen. For example, if you need expenses to come over from NetSuite, that's not something you can do in the standard integration. We've even integrated OpenAir with OpenAir, so that a production system and a sandbox system were able to talk to each other and pass configuration information and data records. And all of this without any middleware at all, directly through OpenAir Scripting Engine. The piece that you need to be aware of is it works off of HTTPS methods. So if you're familiar with post, get, put, patch, delete, RESTful APIs, that's the system that it uses. So I see a few questions on the line asking if it can communicate with certain tools. If that tool is RESTful, if it has a RESTful API, the answer is yes. You don't even have to tell me what the application is. We don't even have to look at it. If it's RESTful, yes. If it is not a RESTful API, the answer is still probably yes. As long if it's using those same RESTful type methods, the posts and the gets, etc., this integration can talk to it. So this has proven to be just really powerful and useful and not terribly difficult to implement. So just be aware of that. Okay. That is everything we wanted to talk through. Okay.